How is it that we can just snatch people off the street without any kind of document or anything and hold them for hours and days and then let them go because there wasn't even a question about finding any kind of document that says I have the right to do that.
Well, let's transition into a conversation about the state of our democracy and the political environment. So, my kids, unfortunately, cannot escape um, politics, what's happening every time they uh, come into the house. Andrew and I are probably watching either CNN or MSNBC or talking about something political happening in the space. When they come over to visit you and I'm there,
Mhm.
a lot of times we're talking about something that has happened around politics. Um, in your new role, I shouldn't say new, you've been in here since 2021, but in your current role, um, as Secretary of State, you are really fighting hard to protect democracy. Are raising healthy kids and protecting democracy related, or are they completely separate?
No, they are very, 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 very related. And that's why it's so important that I don't know if everybody understands what the word democracy means and what it looks like in the United States and what it looks like around the world. And that's a real difficult piece because oftentimes we see things that happen. We see the attack on the universities,
Hmm.
and we don't understand what that means. We just think that's Harvard and Yale, and that's Princeton, UCLA, whatever it may be. What does that have to do with me? Well, it has a lot to do with when people start talking about academic freedom and what it means and your ability to think differently and to work and to basically have some sense of control of your life. People don't recognize that. Kids don't recognize it. They think, well, I'm just going to go to UCLA because I'm going to UCLA. And then when you get there, you may discover that it's a very political environment. It's one of the environments that teaches you how to navigate the world. I mean, much of my thinking about politics and stuff happened when I was a student at UCLA in the heart of the Black Power movement and all the things that happened at that time in the 70s and 60s and 70s, were really taught at that university. And so I thought to myself, and I'd heard about it before I came to UCLA because I was a part of a program at Manual Arts High School that was a high achieving something something, and I had a political science professor teacher who was really into teaching democracy and what it meant,
Hmm.
and how it happened around the world and what's happening to other places and how you lose your right to vote and to your control. And there were people coming into the United States from various places around the world who were basically fighting for their freedoms in other places, and so I was exposed to that in high school, as well as, we had a lot of folks coming in from China, and they were talking about what was happening in their country. And so I was exposed to that in high school and in college. And I'm not sure if that exposure is strong enough right now, even though even my grandkids who hear and see stuff, I don't know if they have the connection to understand what it means when people are taking police officers, just regular police officers, and federalizing them,
Mm.
and how that impacts what happened in Germany and what happened in other countries, where you take these folks and you turn them into police agents of the government,
Mhm.
which means they could control you, they could do anything without even having the ability to argue these cases in court, which is what we see. And so I'm not sure if we're doing a good job in sharing that information, and that frightens me.
Hmm.
That frightens me. Every time I get something in my office that says the government wants to take all the records of Californians and they want all of y'all social security numbers and all of your information that's there. And I'm saying, California says you can't have that. I'm saying you can't have that.
Mm.
That's against the law. We're not going to give you the voting rolls, that not just the list of the people who are registered to vote, but all of the information about it. And anybody I tell them about it, they go, oh, heck, don't give them my social security number. Don't give them this, because what will people do with it in terms of how they will impact your families, how they can intimidate people, how they can do various things. So I don't know if our kids understand what's going on, but it is extremely important, because when they start deciding that they want to make choices about their life,
Mhm.
where they go to school, what they can study, what they can learn, This can be difficult. When you start saying we're going to take all the ethnic studies out of that, we have too much negative stuff, quote unquote, in the museum in D.C. when it's the facts. So now you want to turn it into like a ice cream social, rather than a real discussion about how people lived and what the circumstances were and how you get to a different level of independence. If you allow people to strip that out as they had for years, then the question becomes, who are you and what happens to you and your thinking about yourself? And so I think it is imperative that we do something. And I haven't figured out what yet. Me, when things bug me, I have to figure out something I'm going to do. And being an educator makes me think, once I get past certain cycles of things I got to get done, is developing a program that helps kids to analyze how this stuff relates to their future, their life, their democracy, their right to vote. How do these things come in? How is it that we can just snatch people off the street without any kind of document or anything and hold them for hours and days and then let them go because there wasn't even a question about finding any kind of document that says I have the right to do that. So these things are critically important. I saw it when I traveled around the world, and that's how I realized what was happening here when I was in Ghana, and they tried to do a coup, but it didn't work. And the Ghanaians told me, we're not going to do that because this is what they're trying to do. And you see it in other places. You see it in Zimbabwe where they have election after election after election, and they have one right after the next until they get the right number. And then he's president in Zimbabwe, And friends of mine who were from Zimbabwe understood that. I don't think our kids understand that yet. Yet they should, because their democracy should be protected. Because when they protect the democracy, you protect their independence to be the people they want to be. And if you don't protect that, then you will find yourselves like so many of my friends leaving South Africa, leaving Zimbabwe, leaving those places. Why? Because they couldn't even teach what they wanted to teach or what they needed to teach. And they couldn't live like they wanted to live because it was demanding that you had to do certain things. And that's what's happening now. People are saying, you got to sign these documents else we're not going to give you grants. Who told you could do that? Which now they're taking away your research efforts and your efforts to share information that you need to have. And it's going away because somebody said they can do that. And that's not what democracy is about. And so I just figure like we haven't done enough teaching of it and enough of discussion of what the current situations are so that people understand what has happened around the world and why we're trying to protect what we have.
So it's interesting that you're talking about like the definition of democracy. I listen to a show generally every day, Monday through Friday, and the host had a guest on, and they were talking about democracy. And one of the things that kind of struck me was that particular guest said that democracy is essentially dead here, because democracy means that a group of people all have the same end goal. You may differ on the way in which you get there, but the end goal is the same. And here we can clearly see that different factions see a different type of America. We do not all have the same goal. It's not just that we are debating about how to get to that same goal, but there's clearly at this point a difference in one type of America versus another type of America, one that is inclusive and one that is exclusive, one that is diverse, one that is homogeneous. So what would you say to someone who says, based on that belief, that democracy here is dead?
First of all, I think when the person says we all have to have the same end goal, they need to tell you what it is. Because you can have a very destructive, as we're moving in that direction, where everybody has the same end goal, but it's very destructive because they've eliminated everybody else from the party. They've eliminated everybody else from this environment. So therefore, your perspective in terms of how you see the world is exactly all the same. You can program people that way. yes, we should have the same goal, and that goal should be protecting the rights of every individual. That the Constitution, as it is organized and its statements that are there, yes, we should all have that. We may differ how we get there, but we should all have that. And it doesn't require us all to think the same, but it requires us to have the level of protections that are the same and the structure in the government to basically protect our right to have the freedom we want, the independence that we want, that doesn't interfere with other people's rights and independence. So, yes, we should all have that as our goal, because when we have that as our goal, we struggle to get there because it's we've had our issues in this country, but we struggle to get there but when you get there, when you have that as your goal, it is easier for you to look at the Constitution, to do things in court, to have certain kind of conversations where we have the foundation that's the same. We have the same kind of Constitution that we have that then gives us a kind of a template so that you can say to yourself, okay, you don't like this, you don't like that, but listen, it doesn't impact on your freedom. No. Do I have a right to have a church like I want? Do I have a right to have my university the same? I mean, in terms of what the rights are and the protection of ideas and those kinds of things. At that point, then, yeah, you have a template that you can use in this democracy and this Constitution that gives you that gives you the right to look at things, and it makes it easier to arrive at a conclusion. But when you don't have that, and that's what we're working toward at this point, where we don't have the respect of the Constitution. We don't have respect of the laws that we have right now. We used to. If you got 34 felonies, you're going to go to jail somewhere with somebody. You're not going to have somebody just write it off as a bad experience for 34 times. So what happens is that we have taken what we should have, and now the court, and I guess our concern for our democracy is we're fearful for our courts. Now, they may be waking up. I know they're looking at things, some of them are looking at things differently. But when I was in Germany a couple of weeks ago, they could not even conceive of the kinds of things that are happening in our courts in Germany because they are so unified in support of their Constitution. And the people who serve on their courts only can serve for 12 years. And I mean, they had some great ideas about that. But they were also lockstep in terms of this is the Constitution. This is what we agreed on. These are the rules and regulations that govern how we operate. And as a result, they had this oneness with regards to the Constitution. And that was the beauty of it and those who implemented it. So when we begin to start messing with those pieces that are there, that's where the problem comes in. That's where the problem comes in. And as a result of that, and we have strayed away from that because we used to, Brown versus Board of Education was one thing, but Plessy versus Ferguson said you could separate people and those kinds of things. So we did have that as this divided perspective. But we then had a unified perspective. And now we're in a point where we don't know what the Constitution is going to provide for us at all. And so that's an ongoing conversation. And that's one of the greatest concerns that we have is that these three branches of government that we had that we thought were pretty balanced, checks and balances, were pretty solid based on the Constitution.
Right.
And now we wonder if people are actually using it for their own purpose, distorting the Constitution, distorting the rights of individuals because you don't like the fact that they came from somewhere else, that you don't think they have constitutional rights and they do. Those kinds of things are really of great concern for us. And so that's it. Yeah.
One of the things that we have learned is that what we thought was foundational was really not foundational. And it was really more so based on one's individual belief, their moral belief that they were going to stick to this.
Yeah.
And now we have a group of individuals who feel like they are going to go in a completely opposite direction. So where we thought we had three separate, what we called co-equal branches of government, those who are currently in those seats, or some of those people who are in those seats, are essentially just merging it into one, choosing to merge it into one. And we've just never seen that before and never recognized that what we considered as our democracy, as our foundation, and the way in which everything was structured here was really structured based on individuals' belief and not having enough checks and balances to put those walls up. Another thing that we're seeing across this nation, and it also falls under your purview as our Secretary of State, are multiple states restricting voter access. We also currently have this case in front of the Supreme Court dealing with the Voting Rights Act. Um, why do you think that a lot of the things that are happening across the country could disenfranchise voters?
Well, because they have in the past. And so this is not new stuff. This is old stuff. Voting Rights Act of 1965 was addressing those issues. People thought, well, it gave people the right to vote. It didn't. It protected their right to vote.
Mm.
And so as a result, when the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it took away it removed all these barriers, these issues that made it available for some people to be able to vote and other people not able to vote, and took away a lot of the folks' rights and empowered folks to be very violent about voting rights. And so that, and that lasted for a long time. I always tell people that despite the fact that my ancestors have been in this country for probably over 200 years, I'm just a second generation voter, because prior to that, my grandparents never got a chance to vote, and my great-grandparents never did either. And my dad finally got a chance to vote when they moved to California. But prior to that, there was no voting rights. There was no protection, because if you attempted to register to vote in Arkansas, you'd be murdered. You'd be killed. So, so we've had these barriers there before, and people know that those barriers work in keeping people out of the right to vote. And so as a result, there's an effort now to try to increase these issues that are there. And then part of that is if I give you all the voting rolls that I have and all the data and information, I could probably find people who could probably figure out ways to disenfranchise folks. They want us to go back to one-day voting, and that's always difficult because a lot of people can't vote on that one day. People don't. I go way out to Calexico to register people to vote. They've never had a Secretary of State. They told me to come out to Calexico to get their issues correct, because so that people are not doing various things with the voting that's there. And so we've done some things, and obviously that doesn't make people very happy. I think it's 84% of all eligible citizens in California are registered to vote. We've never had 84% of us registered to vote. And so, but it empowers people, and those who want to change the world know that one of the ways you change it is by changing the voting system. And so now there's an effort to try to change our voting system, the vote by mail, the way in which we registered people. We do have IDs. Everybody has to have an ID in order to register to vote. It's verified and checked and what have you. But they want to go to a different kind of system that would require you to go into the polls to show your ID and all those kinds of things. And so there is an effort to try to limit what we've done in California. And some states are more agreeable because they have secretaries of states who are either more afraid or afraid they won't get reelected or whatever the drama might be. I'm not one of those people, and so as a result, I try to do my job to protect it, along with our AG, and protect the right of every citizen in California who's eligible to vote. So there is an effort to try to just look and see that California has such a extensive voting system. And how do they change it? They don't change it necessarily by changing our ideas, but they change it by the system that we put in place. And it would disenfranchise those who are poor, and mostly those who are people of color, if they limit how often we can vote, what time we vote, all those kinds of things. You put those barriers up there, which we're not apt to do. But if we were to do that, that would have a devastating effect on California.
When you were nominated, when Governor Gavin Newsom nominated you in 2021, I think it was January of 2021.
That's when I was sworn in. He nominated me in December
That's
2020.
right. Yeah, I remember that. That was an interesting time. I was like, oh my goodness, here we go again. It was something new. But it was historic because you are California's first Black Secretary of State, and I believe the second Black constitutional officer.
Fifth.
The fifth was Black constitutional officer. You are very unique in this particular role because as we're talking about democracy, as we're talking about access to voter integrity, you actually lived during a time, as you stated, you're just second generation voter, but you actually lived during a time in a place in the South where there was so much effort to restrict voting, where there was so much destruction, even at that time, to democracy in terms of creating a United States that was equal and fair and open to everyone. Um, you lived during that time. You lived during the civil rights era. We were talking the other day. I asked you, I was like, do you remember when Martin Luther King got shot? Do you remember when Malcolm X got shot? Do you remember when Emmett Till occurred? Like, these are things that I learned about as history, but you actually lived those times. How significant do you think it is that you are California's Secretary of State at this particular time in history?
Well, I think in many ways it's very unique because I know a number of secretaries of state across the nation, and most of them are much younger than I am. Some of them are less informed about what it really means. And when I run across folks who want to tinker and tanker with the voting rights, I'm much more adamant about it because I know what it's like to live in a world where you don't have the right to vote. And I also know when to live in a world that's nothing to vote for. That you have created such an environment that doesn't matter who you pick in your community, they're not going to represent you. They're not going to do it right. They're not going to give you what you deserve. And the Voting Rights Act did that by diversifying the people who actually got elected by that. And so now as people talk about changing districts and so forth and so on, you're basically talking about changing representation, changing your voice. Because we can't all go to Washington. We can't all go to our state house. But we can pick people to go there who can carry our voice. And so when you start tinkering with the voice, you start tinkering with taking away that opportunity, you then you disempower the communities that are often not represented, and therefore change the kind of discussion that you're going to have. So it is unique in that sense. When I was asked to become Secretary of State, I thought hard and long about it because I was kind of looking forward to retirement.
As was I.
Yeah, I know, as you free child care.
Yes.
And so I was looking forward to retirement. I had gotten in saying I'd do 6 years and discovered when I got there that they changed it to 12. So I said, okay.
The assembly.
Yeah, in the assembly. I said, oh my God. So therefore I said, okay, I can do this. And then I realized I was almost near the end. I won my 5th term or whatever it was. And 5th term. And I only had 2 more years to go after that. And so I had like 4 years to go and I was out. Okay. And then I got this offer, and I really thought hard and long about it. My sisters, when I finally told them a day or two before it was announced, they went, "Why wouldn't you do it? This is historic. This is all that stuff." I said, "I don't know if I want to be in the midst of the fire," because I told everybody this is going to be a fire, and because I saw it coming. I saw it. I told it to the press. I saw it coming when I was in Ghana, and I saw what they were doing there. And so, so I thought about it hard and long. I really did. And then before I even told you guys, but I realized that Mom and Dad would have been very proud, number one. And there were generations and generations of folks who fought so hard to get the right to vote. And who would fight harder for them than me. And I knew that. I knew that it was like, I knew what I lived in those communities. My mother actually had a polling place in our living room in Los Angeles. They believed so strongly about voting, and we didn't have a place in our district, in our area, our precinct, to actually vote because we didn't have a rec center, and we didn't have any of those kinds of places that were close by. And my mother volunteered our house as a polling place. So I grew up seeing people vote. I knew how important it was for them that people got a chance to vote. And I knew that the situation we were in with the calling of the president saying that this is a hoax and a da-da-da-da-da, I knew that this was going to be a difficult situation. It was not going to be for somebody who's weak and who's questioning themselves, but somebody who's going to fight for him. And I knew that there would be a difficult task, but I would not ever back down or give up. That's just who I am. And so I decided I'll do this because it means that much to folks that I knew forever. And it meant that much to me.
Yeah.
And I knew it would mean that much to you and the boys.
Yeah. No, I think I have evolved to an individual who believes that everything happens for a reason, even if you can try to create your own path. But, if that's not the path that you're supposed to be on, you will be diverted over to the correct path that you're supposed to be on. And I do think that, California is very fortunate to have someone like you who is a fighter, but also has that historical knowledge that so many of us do not have, because it helps us understand exactly what we're fighting for. It's not some abstract idea or something that we have to read in a history book, but actually dealing with people who have actually lived it and experienced it and know the challenges, the inequities that actually come with a lot of these policies. So I do want to talk about what we have here in California. You mentioned some. So California has vote by mail, so everybody gets their ballot in the mail. You also have same-day registration. We have long early voting periods, so our
11 days.
11 days, that gives people ample enough time to actually go into the polls if they want. And this has been, as you were alluding to, a bone of contention for members, for people, especially those in the Republican Party, who talk about the fact that these policies make elections less secure. Can you talk about that for us?
Well, it's hard to talk about because there's no evidence and there's no data at all. And I keep saying to them, show me the data and we'll deal with it. We have the Brennan Center and all these other folks have done work for the last 5, 6, 7 years, and they have discovered that there is no significant fraud in California or anywhere in the United States in terms of elections. And we invite people in to see what's going on with elections. You can go watch them counting ballots. You can't touch them, but you can see through the glass window all the work that's taking place and what have you. So there's no information, there's no data about it. One congressman said, well, the longer they count, the more we lose, which I thought was kind of funny because what is, that means that you were losing anyway because you didn't get enough votes. So you want us to stop the voting. I mean, they literally want us to stop voting at a certain date, even if the votes haven't been counted. And those who are nervous and have a tendency to follow the words of the Republicans, oh my God, we're counting so long. But please count all the votes.
Right.
Well, you can't ask me to count all the votes. You can't ask me to cure the votes. You can't ask me to count after 7 days if things come in the mail and they're postmarked on time and eventually work their way to us, because sometimes they go out of state and back in the state depending on the route of the postal service. So all these things come together and you want me to count every vote. Now, most of the times the decisions are made in 3 or 4 days. We know that. California only had 2 voting precincts that were continuing to vote, and that was because of the high controversy. But the interesting thing was 2 years ago, it was the same districts, the same 2 people fighting for the seat. The Republicans won those, and they never complained about how long it took us to come to that conclusion.
Right.
Because we went, once again, to a long period of time before we end up with those 2 seats actually being decided for Republicans. Nobody complained. This time, we went the same amount of time, the same distance, counting those same votes, and this time it turned out to be Democrats. So, you can listen to that, and that one is a chatter because there's no evidence that says we're cheating, we're hiding votes, we're doing things. I mean, these kinds of things are often mentioned. And yet at the same time, if this is so horrible, how did we end up with Trump reelected as president? I mean, if we cheated, wouldn't we do something across the nation that people could see? And yet you have Republicans being elected to office in California, and nobody says anybody cheated with them.
Right.
So it's one of these things. It continues. We've spent our time in the Secretary of State's office. You listed all the things we do, all the things people like. When you start talking about it, no, don't take away my vote by mail. I like that. Don't take away this. I like that. No, count every vote. Don't leave some on the table. Do this, do that. And so a lot of that, and even finding people who failed to sign their ballot. We go and find those people. We call them and say, hey, you didn't sign your ballot. Can you come in the next 3 to 4 days and sign the ballot? We give everyone, and we don't know whether Democrat or Republican, we give everybody a right to basically participate in the process. But we're going to get the naysayers always because they want to destroy confidence in voting. And yet when you talk to a lot of folks, they'll ask you questions, you give them the answers, they go, well, I think you guys do a pretty good job. I said, we got 23 million ballots to count. That's an awful lot of ballots to count in California. And everybody recognizes that. And we have 59 counties in all these areas. And in the end, it gets done. It's amazing how it gets done. And people can't, there's no pointing of fingers of who did what and who didn't. I don't know whether the people working in my office are Democrats or Republicans. I really don't know, because they say they're defenders of democracy. That's what the elected people call themselves.
Right.
And that's what they do. So, we're going to get the naysayers. We're going to get those who complain. Well, there are fewer of them who do. We have lots of folks who answer questions on election day. We've had folks with all kinds of already missing disinformation. We respond to all of those. I was on TV the other day responding to some misinformation. We put a press release out. People now are happy. Okay, that's not a problem. Move on to something else. But it will always exist as so long as we have folks who want to question the system. And that's a part of the destruction of the system. If we can convince people that they're being cheated, that something's going wrong, even though there's no evidence of it, you get into people's minds and they will do some very destructive things, as we've seen people in this country do some very destructive things based on mis and disinformation. But we still struggle with it because this voting system is the best democracy we have in the world. And we continue to work to make it even better.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for clarifying that because, people often hear about election integrity, vote by mail is an issue, same-day voter registration. How do you know it's really a citizen or someone who's not? And I like what you said. Show me the data. As clear, people can clearly see Webers are about data because I always talk about show me the data when you are bringing things before me. So I have just 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
So.
Wow.
Mommy dearest, as I call you sometimes when I want to get under your skin.
Yes.
So you are a mother, someone who has spent your entire life fighting for justice, for democracy, for education, for all of those things. But at the end of the day, what would you want your grandsons, Mr. Kadir, Mr. Jalil, to know about you?
The funny thing is, my grandsons know that they're the heart and throb of me, so they can get to me with all kinds of things, and I'm very proud of the work and what they do that's there. But I think when I did the bill concerning lethal force, and I was at the Capitol, and we were sitting there, and we were talking about something, and Kadir said to me, he says, just out of the blue, he said, sometimes you're grandma. He said, and then other times you're that other lady. And I said, what other lady? It was just, and I said, okay. I said, what other lady? And he looked around, he didn't want anybody to hear him. He says, that powerful lady. I said, oh. And I stopped and I thought, and I said, well, do you like that other lady? He said, yes. And I thought that was kind of interesting because he sees me as his grandmother, the lady who helps him bake cookies and make things at my house and sometimes sit out on the patio and have breakfast and watch the dragonflies, drink up the water from the pool, whatever it is. And they know without a doubt that I'm their grandmother, that she's the person who takes us places and travels with us and does all these kind of fun things and play games at the house. And they feel very comfortable going in and out of the house and staying there when they need to stay there and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, when sitting there, they realize that this woman is pretty powerful. And nobody ever told him that. But he says, you're this one lady, you're the grandma. He said, you're these 2 people, you're grandma, and then you're the other lady. And I'm grateful that they see the duality, that they don't see me just as their grandma and don't know what I do on the side. They know exactly what goes on because they attend events with me. They talk to people and they've spoken at my swearing in. I include them in all of those things because I want them to become familiar with the environments that I've lived in, that they can live in as well. But also, like I said, they know I'm their grandmother. Without a doubt, they talk about the oatmeal that I make for them that they think is the best in the world, which is really not, but they think it is. But at the same time, they know that I'm this lady who has some other responsibilities, that I fight for them, I fight for other people, and I do those kinds of things. And that's reassuring to me. I remember when my son was about their age, and he was the same thing. He was in my office with some of his friends, and there was a plaque on the wall that was done by the LGBT community. I was the something of the year. I can't remember exactly what it is. Maybe in the parade, I was a grand marshal. I can't remember. And so one of his friends looked at the plaque, and he goes, LGBT community, is your mother LGBT? And he goes, no, my mama just fights for everybody. And it was kind of hilarious. And I heard him tell this guy that, and the guy goes, oh, okay. And I forgot which one of his friends it was, but it was something that was on my wall. And I thought to myself, well, that's good. My son knows that I fight for everybody, So I'm glad that my kids see me as the mother that they can count on, that can help them with their personal issues and this issue and that issue, and be there for them in education and all the things that they fight for in their lives. But at the same time, and that I'm their mother, but at the same time, I have these other things that haven't necessarily hopefully interfered or contradicted the values that I have, that I still have to fight for those things. And, as my son asked me, somebody asked me, how long am I going to fight? I said, probably till the day I die. And I hope I will have instilled in you enough that you'll continue to fight once I'm gone.
Mm-hmm. I think, looking back, I think Kadir was probably maybe 4 or 5 at that time. So pretty
I think
powerful.
I think he was 5 or 6, because it was about 6 years old when he just out the blue told me this, because he was in his little suit, and it was at the swearing in at the Capitol, and he and his brother was suited too.
Yeah.
Jaleel was there, but the fact that he had this idea that he just, he would come up with crazy ideas always. Mom, who's going to be, if it's two alligator and what is it, a crocodile? No, if an alligator and something had a fight, who would win? I mean, he would have all these little things that blow my mind. But when he started talking about this duality, I was like, wow, he knows who I am, that I'm this, sometime I'm this and sometime I'm that. But when I asked him, did he like that other person? He said, yeah, he really did. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Final question. So we are in a very, what I call, interesting time. And I use that word very, very loosely now. Every time I say, oh, this is very interesting. This is interesting. It is a very challenging time for a lot of people, regardless of your age, regardless of your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status, your religion. It is a very, very, very challenging time for most Californians, most people across the United States. What gives you hope right now?
I think that what gives me hope is that, one, I come from a generation of people who always fought and never looked back and never counted the cost. That they fought for what was right and what was just. They stood hard and fast on the things that they believed in. Even when my dad had to come to California, fleeing California, he fleeing Arkansas, not knowing, not even being able to read that well. But he did it anyway because he was determined that he was going to do something better for his family. So I come from, we come from these generations of folks who do that. And I believe that generation and that bloodline and that activity still runs warm in the blood of so many people. Sometimes we have to activate it. We have to remind ourselves. I've had to do that many times at the Capitol when I was offered an opportunity to waiver and to not fight to the last drop for a bill to make it mandatory. I had to pull in every memory I ever had and every belief that this is nothing in comparison to what my ancestors fought for, in comparison to what they had to deal with, and that I had a few more resources and a few more folks that fight with me. So I believe in that, and I believe very strongly that there is still in this generation, and I know it's in the older generation. We haven't tapped into them yet, but when you talk to them, they understand what they need to do, and they may not be able to walk and march as far as other people. But these folks have some strength in them, some internal strength. I see a lot of seniors going to these meetings, and they are in there. Miss Matthews walking mountains and what have you to take in folks for elections, and same is true with Elise and a host of other folks who just work themselves to the bone because they know what lies ahead. So when you see that kind of engagement and you see young people kind of taken with them in terms of what needs to happen, I believe that we're stronger than we know. And I see this in the parades and the marches that are going on today that consistently go on and get larger and larger, that they may not have the resources that some of the oligarchs of the world have to buy elections and what have you. But I do believe that they have the strength to fight and to understand and to recognize that this is not a good direction to go, that the hatred and the discrimination that exists is not what we want. So that wakes me up every morning knowing that I come from a generation of folks that fight, that I have nothing to fear. I have a faith that teaches me there's nothing to fear, and I have, other things that tells me that I'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in itself, every morning you have to get up and say that and remind yourself, because there's so much negative and there's so much out there, and there's so much for people to fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I refuse to be afraid.
Mm. Well, thank you for that. So that's a great point to end on. Really want to thank you so much for joining the podcast today. Want to thank you so much for everything that you have done in the community, in the state. Being an amazing role model is not just a community leader, but as a mom, a role model of what I should do as I raise my 2 young boys. And like I say, you are the best grandmother that has ever lived. And so I really want to thank you, and thank you for showing that you can be as fierce for your family as you are for your community, and that they truly, truly are intertwined, and fighting for democracy, because this is not an easy time, as I stated, but we need people like you. We need the voices. We need your fire, because that ignites seriously an entire community and an entire generation. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. And I get compliments all the time. They said, you did something right when you raised Akilah. And I said, yes, I did.
Oh, that's so sweet.
They all say
And what
that.
people don't realize is I don't get compliments from my mom very often.
Well, because I don't have to. It lives in the house. It lives in the boys. It lives in everything you do. But they often tell me, anybody who I call for whatever reason at the Capitol will say to me, you know what? I love your daughter. You did a great job raising her. And I said, good, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you again for not just being on this podcast, but for everything. To everyone listening, this conversation is bigger than our family. It's for every parent trying to raise children in challenging times. It's for every person who believes democracy is worth fighting for. It's for every woman of color navigating the weight of expectation and responsibility. Whether we're talking about raising healthy children or protecting healthy democracy, the lesson is the same. It takes all of us. It takes presence, purpose, and, as has been stated, persistence. It takes community, and it takes courage to keep showing up even when the work is hard. Thank you for joining us on this very special episode of Prescribing a Healthier Future. If this conversation moved you, please share it with parents, educators, and advocates in your life. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Your support helps us continue these important conversations. Until next time, protect what matters, your family, your community, and our democracy. Be well.